The wind howled like a wounded animal outside the Velvet Fox. It was the kind of blizzard that turned Chicago onto a frozen graveyard. In January 2025, snow didn't fall, it attacked. Thick, blinding sheets slammed against the brick walls, burying the alley behind the club in seconds. The neon sign above the back door flickered weakly blood red against white before the storm nearly swallowed it whole. Inside the Jazz was low and smoky. A saxophone cried softly over the clink of crystal glasses. Most people came here to forget the world. No one expected the world to crash in. The emergency door exploded open with a bang that cut through the music like a gunshot. A girl stumbled through 18-soaked, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Blood mixed with melting snow ran down her cheek from a cut above her right eye. An ugly bruise bloomed along her jaw. Her gray hoodie clung to her thin frame jeans, torn at the knees, sneakers caked in mud and ice. She slipped on the wet tile, caught herself on the wall with a wet slap, then looked around with wild, terrified brown eyes. Everyone froze. The bartenders. The jazz band. The two armed men sitting near the wall who hadn't touched their drinks in 20 minutes. Only one person moved. Jax Harlan. He sat in the corner booth back to the wall the way he always did. 46 years old, broad shoulders under a black tailored coat, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His face was carved from something harder than stone. A glass of bourbon sat untouched in front of him. He rose slowly. The girl's eyes locked onto him like he was the last solid thing in a collapsing world. She didn't run toward the exit. She staggered forward toward the shadows, toward the corner toward him, as if his booth was the only wall left between her and whatever hunted her outside. She made it 10 feet into the main room before her legs gave out. She collapsed hard onto the polished floor right in front of Jax's table. A water glass tipped over, spilling across the white linen. The entire club went dead silent. Jax was already moving. He knelt on one knee beside her, slow and deliberate the way you approach a frightened animal that might bolt or bite. Up close, he saw everything. The fresh bruise, the blood, the raw terror in her wide eyes. Before he could speak, the back door crashed open again. A tall man stepped in, 6'2", broad chest, expensive coat dusted with snow. Victor Kane, Illinois state senator. The kind of man whose face smiled from campaign posters and charity galas. His expression was calm, almost pleasant. But his eyes burned. "Mia," he called, voice smooth and commanding. "Sweetheart, it's over. You're having another episode. Come on, let's go home." The girl, Mia Harper, flinched as if he'd slapped her. She pressed herself tighter against the floor, fingers digging into the carpet, like it could swallow her whole. Victor walked forward, ignoring every stare in the room. He reached down for her arm. "Stop." The single word sliced through the air. Jax hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The command was low, flat, absolute. Victor's hand froze midair. For the first time, the senator really looked at the man in the corner booth. Jax Harlan didn't blink. His dark eyes held something ancient and dangerous, the kind of quiet that made powerful men suddenly remember they were only flesh and bone. Victor recovered quickly. He straightened, adjusted his coat, and forced a concerned smile. "I'm terribly sorry for the disturbance," he said, voice warm and practiced. "This is my stepdaughter. She has emotional issues, delusions. It's been hard on the family. I just need to get her home and get her medication." Mia shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly. "No, no, no." Jax ignored Victor completely. He lowered himself even closer to the girl on the floor. His voice dropped to something gentle, so gentle that the two men by the wall exchanged a quick, startled glance. No one had heard that tone from Jax Harlan in years. He looked straight into her eyes and asked the only question that mattered. "Do you know this man?" Mia's lips trembled. Tears mixed with the blood and melted snow on her face. She glanced at Victor, then back at Jax. Her voice came out as nothing more than a broken whisper. "He's my stepfather." Victor let out a soft breath of relief. But Mia wasn't finished. Her next words fell like stones into still water. "And he's been selling me to powerful men for the last 2 years." The jazz stopped. The entire club went so quiet you could hear the blizzard screaming outside. Victor Kane's face drained of color. Mia's eyes stayed locked on Jax's. In them wasn't just fear anymore. There was something sharper, a desperate, fragile hope. The hope of someone who had screamed for help inside a soundproof room and finally impossibly found someone listening on the other side. Jax Harlan did not move. He did not blink. But something shifted behind his eyes. Something deep, tectonic, and irreversible. In that frozen moment, every person in the Velvet Fox understood the same terrifying truth of the night. The storm outside had brought something far more dangerous into their world. And nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after Mia's whisper stretched so thin, it felt like glass about to shatter. Jax Harlan stayed on one knee, his dark eyes never leaving hers. The girl was still trembling, her fingers curled into the wet carpet like she was afraid the floor would open and drag her back into the storm. He rose slowly, his voice low and steady, carrying across the frozen room. "Nico, close the club. Now." Nico Reyes moved without hesitation. Within minutes, the remaining guests were quietly ushered out the front. The heavy doors locked with a solid click. The neon sign outside flipped to closed. The jazz band packed up in silence, instruments disappearing into cases like secrets being buried. Jax turned to the two men by the wall. "Take him to the back room. Don't let him leave." Victor Kane's polished smile finally cracked. "You can't do this," he said, voice rising. "She's my stepdaughter. I'm her legal guardian. This is kidnapping." Jax didn't even look at him. He gently helped Mia to her feet. She was lighter than she should have been, her body still shaking from cold and fear. He kept one hand lightly under her elbow, guiding her away from the main floor down a narrow hallway lined with dark wood and soft lighting, until they reached a private VIP room at the very back of the Velvet Fox. The door clicked shut behind them. Only then did Mia's legs truly give out again. She sank onto the edge of a deep leather couch, pulling her knees to her chest. The blanket someone had brought smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. She clutched it like armor. Jax sat across from her, leaving plenty of space. He didn't crowd her. He didn't speak right away. He simply waited the way a man who had learned long ago that some truths only came out when the room stopped demanding them. Mia stared at her hands for a long time. Her voice, when it finally came, was hoarse and small. "No one ever believed me." She started slowly. Fragments at first. Victor had married her mother when Mia was 14. At first, he seemed perfect, kind, generous, always smiling for the cameras at his youth outreach events. But the rules came quietly. No friends over. Phone checked every night. Bedroom door never fully closed. Then the men started coming, always when her mother was working late. Victor would tell Mia to put on something nice. Important donors were arriving. She needed to make a good impression for the cause. At 16, it began in earnest. Different men, different nights. Politicians, Real estate developers, men with power and money who wanted something young and broken they could control. Victor traded her like currency one night with Mia in exchange for contracts, vote silence on dirty deals. Every time she tried to tell someone, a teacher, a counselor, even her own mother, Victor was ready. He had papers. A respected psychiatrist named Dr. Marcus Hale, who had never once examined her, but gladly signed documents claiming she suffered from severe delusional disorder and compulsive lying. Trauma from her absent father, he called it. They all believed him. The system sent her straight back every single time. Mia's voice cracked as she spoke. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she kept going as if stopping now would mean drowning in the words she had carried alone for 2 years. I stopped fighting eventually. Tell him to start digging. Everything on Victor Kane, the outreach centers, the psychiatrist, the men who visited that house. I want it all. He turned back to Mia. You're not going back there. Not tonight. Not ever. Mia's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Not the sharp, terrified gasps from earlier, but something deeper, the sound of a girl who had been holding a door shut with all her strength for years and had finally been told she could let go. Jax didn't touch her. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply stood there, a steady, immovable presence in the dimly lit room, letting her fall apart in safety for the first time in her life. Later that night, under the cover of the still raging blizzard, Mia was moved. A black SUV cut through the snow-covered streets to a sleek penthouse high above the city. Mrs. Evelyn Grant, a calm, silver-haired woman in her 60s, opened the door without questions. Fresh sheets waited on the bed. Warm lights glowed softly. The storm howled against the reinforced glass windows, but inside, everything was quiet. Jax watched from the doorway as Mrs. Grant gently led Mia upstairs for a hot bath and dry clothes. He stayed only long enough to make sure she was safe. Then he stepped back into the elevator, the weight in his chest heavier than it had been in years. Mia Harper was no longer just a frightened girl who had crashed through his door. She was the spark. And Jax Harlan, the most feared man in Chicago, could already feel the fire beginning to spread, a war he had not asked for, but one he would not walk away from. Because some wounds never healed. And sometimes protecting someone else was the only way to keep the old ones from bleeding you dry. The penthouse was silent, except for the low hum of the heating system fighting the endless Chicago winter. Mia Harper stood at the floor-to-ceiling window on her 3rd morning there, wrapped in a thick cream sweater that wasn't hers. Below, the city looked small and far away, buried under fresh snow. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. A soft knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Evelyn Grant opened it quietly, then stepped aside. A woman in her mid-20s entered. Same dark hair as Mia, same delicate jawline, but her eyes carried a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from years of being kept at arm's length. Elena Voss stopped a few feet away, hands clasped tightly in front of her coat. Mia. The name came out like a question and an apology all at once. Mia turned slowly. For a long moment, neither sister spoke. The last time they had seen each other, Elena had been pushed out of the house after questioning one of Victor's donor dinners. Victor had made sure the distance grew wider every year. I didn't know, Elena whispered. Her voice cracked. I suspected. But I let myself believe his stories. I'm so sorry. Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream that Elena should have fought harder. Instead, she took one shaky step forward, then another, until the two sisters stood close enough to touch. They didn't hug. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh. But something small and fragile shifted between them, the first crack in years of isolation. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived. Dr. Sophia Lang was a quiet woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a voice that never rushed. She sat across from Mia in the sunlit living room, a notebook resting untouched on her lap. "We don't have to talk about everything today," she said gently. "We can start wherever you feel safe." Mia hesitated for nearly 10 minutes, fingers twisting the edge of the sweater. When she finally spoke, the words came haltingly about the fear that lived under her skin, about learning to doubt her own memories, about the nights she had lain awake, wondering if she really was crazy, like everyone said. "Doctor?" Lang listened without judgment. For the first time in 2 years, Mia felt seen not as a problem, but as a person. Jax Harlan began visiting more often than he had planned. At first, he told himself it was only duty. He would arrive in the early evening snow, still clinging to his coat, and speak briefly with Mrs. Grant about security. He checked the new cameras Rook Delgado had installed. He made sure the building remained invisible to anyone searching for Mia Harper. But he always ended up in the living room. Mia would be curled on the couch with a book or staring out at the city lights. She never asked him to stay yet. She never asked him to leave either. One night the conversation drifted. "You look tired," Mia said softly, noticing the shadows under his eyes. Jax gave a small, humorless smile. "I've looked tired for 27 years. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Mia had already heard the quiet mentions of Sophie Harlan, the sister who never came home. She saw the way his shoulders tensed whenever the past brushed too close. Still, something kept pulling him back. He noticed the way Mia's hands had stopped shaking quite so badly, the way her voice grew steadier when she spoke to Elena or Dr. Lang, the way her eyes once filled only with terror now held flickers of quiet determination. It terrified him, because every time he looked at her, he felt a dangerous warmth bloom in his chest, something slow and deep and entirely unwelcome. He was 46. She was 18. He carried a lifetime of blood and shadows. She was just beginning to step out of hers. He told himself he would keep his distance. He failed every single night he returned. Meanwhile, the world outside the penthouse began to push back. Rook Delgado arrived one freezing afternoon with fresh intelligence. The young enforcer's face was serious as he handed Jax a sealed folder in the private study. "Victor's already moving," Rook said quietly. "He's calling in favors from half the state senate, leaking stories that Mia is unstable and that you're holding her against her will. He's painting himself as the worried father." Jax's jaw tightened. He felt the familiar cold rage rise, the same rage that had built his empire. But this time, it was tangled with something new, something protective, something that made him willing to burn everything if it meant keeping Mia safe. That evening, Jax stood at the penthouse window long after Mia had gone to bed. Snow fell steadily outside, soft and silent now. He thought of Sophie. He thought of the sister he couldn't save. Then he thought of Mia alive, breathing slowly, healing under this roof. His hand curled into a fist at his side. For the first time in decades, the cold armor around his heart showed the faintest crack. He wasn't sure whether he wanted to seal it shut or let it break wide open. Because protecting Mia Harper was becoming more than duty. It was becoming personal. And in Jax Harlan's world, personal had always been the most dangerous word of all. The blizzard had reached its cruelest hour. Wind screamed through the skeletal trees outside the abandoned warehouse on the edge of Chicago's industrial wasteland. Snow whipped sideways in blinding sheets, turning the night into a white void. Inside the freezing metal building, only a single hanging bulb swung above two men. Jax Harlan stood motionless in the center of the empty space coat, dusted with snow breath fogging in the bitter cold. Victor Kane arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by two nervous bodyguards who clearly didn't want to be there. The senator's face was flushed from the wind, but his eyes still carried that practiced politician's calm. "You're making a very expensive mistake," Harlan, Victor said, voice echoing off the metal walls. "I have friends in Springfield. I have friends in Washington. One call from me, and your entire operation starts bleeding." Jax didn't answer right away. He simply pulled a thick envelope from inside his coat and dropped it onto the dusty table between them. Victor opened it slowly. Photographs, bank records, names, dates. Girls who had passed through his youth outreach centers and then simply vanished from the system. Evidence that Victor hadn't just used Mia Harper. He had built an entire quiet machinery around her, selecting vulnerable girls, grooming them, trading them like currency for power and silence. Victor's hands tightened on the papers until the edges crumpled. "You have no idea what you're stepping into," he hissed. "I own half the people who matter in this state. You touch me, and I'll bury you so deep, even your own men won't find the body." Jax took one slow step closer. His voice, when it came, was quiet, almost gentle. "I lost my sister 27 years ago. She was 16. I've carried that silence every single day since. So when I look at Mia, I don't see a girl you can threaten. I see the sister I couldn't save." For the first time, real fear flickered across Victor Kane's face. He tried to recover, straightening his coat with shaking fingers. "She's unstable. Delusional. Dr. Marcus Hale will testify to that in any court. You're harboring a minor with severe mental health issues. The press will eat you alive." Jax smiled then. It was a small, cold smile that never reached his eyes. Dr. Hale already talked. Rook made sure of that. Turns out he even bought doctors break when the right pressure is applied. Victor's face drained of color. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if the city itself was holding its breath. At the same moment, miles away in the warm penthouse, high above the frozen streets, something else was breaking open. Mia Harper sat in the softly lit living room, knees drawn up on the couch. Elena Voss sat on one side of her. Dr. Sophia Lang sat on the other. 3 other young women survivors who had once been funneled through Victor's centers listened in heavy silence. Mia's voice trembled at first. She spoke about the nights the men came, about the envelopes passed between Victor and his guests, about the way she had slowly disappeared inside herself until she no longer knew who she was. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't stop. For the first time, she told her story, not as a broken girl begging to be believed, but as a survivor choosing to speak. Elena reached over and took her sister's hand. Their fingers laced together tightly. Dr. Sophia Lang's eyes shone with quiet pride. "You're not crazy, Mia," she said softly. "You never were." Back at the warehouse, Jax Harlan made his choice. He looked Victor Kane dead in the eyes and spoke the words that would change everything. "You're finished. Detective Kate Ruiz already has everything she needs. The only question left is how hard you want this to fall." Victor lunged forward in sudden rage, but Rook Delgado and Nico Reyes stepped out of the shadows, blocking him instantly. The senator's voice cracked with desperation. "You think you can play hero, you? A man like you, the whole city knows what you are." Jax turned away, walking toward the warehouse door as the wind screamed outside. "I know exactly what I am," he said without looking back. "But tonight, I'm choosing to be something better. The drive back through the blizzard felt endless. Jax sat in the back of the black SUV, snow hammering the windows. His mind kept returning to the penthouse. To Mia's face, the last time he had seen her, quieter, stronger, no longer shrinking from every shadow. He realized with a sharp, painful clarity that he could no longer protect her from a distance. If he wanted her safe, truly safe, he would have to step fully into the fire. He would have to risk the empire he had spent decades building. He would have to risk the cold armor that had kept him alive all these years. The car finally pulled up to the private entrance of the building. Jax stepped out into the driving snow and looked up at the lighted windows far above. His chest felt tight. For 27 years, he had lived with the ghost of his sister. Tonight, for the first time, he felt something else stirring beneath the weight, something warm and dangerous and alive. He wasn't sure if it was hope. He wasn't sure if it was love. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he was no longer willing to lose another girl to the silence. Not this time. Spring came late to Chicago that year. By the time the last dirty snow melted from the sidewalks, the city had already changed. Detective Kate Ruiz stood on the steps of the courthouse on a cool April morning, her short gray hair ruffled by the wind. She watched as Victor Kane was led out of a black SUV in handcuffs, right in the middle of what was supposed to be his own carefully staged press conference about youth safety initiatives. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Victor's polished smile had completely shattered. His eyes darted wildly as federal agents read the charges: trafficking, conspiracy, exploitation of minors, and more. He looked small under the bright lights. One by one, the others fell. Ryan Brooks, the real estate developer. Derek Lang, the powerful donor. Senator Alan Pierce's allies. Even Dr. Marcus Hale lost his license and faced prison time after his testimony collapsed under pressure. The network Victor had built so carefully over the years crumbled like ice under spring's sun. None of it happened overnight. It took months of quiet, relentless work. Evidence gathered from multiple sources, statements taken in safe rooms. Girls who had once been invisible finally found the courage to speak. Through it all, Mia Harper's name stayed out of the headlines. She remained simply Witness A in the court documents, protected anonymous and finally free. In the quiet penthouse, Mia stood in front of the mirror one morning, adjusting the strap of a simple backpack. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her hair was shorter now, healthier. The bruise on her jaw had long since faded. Elena Voss waited by the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "First day of classes?" Elena asked, voice gentle. Mia nodded, a small, nervous smile touching her lips. "Psychology and social work. It feels right." They walked down together. For the first time in years, the silence between the sisters felt warm instead of heavy. Laura Harper came to visit on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Mia met her mother in the living room, heart pounding. Laura looked smaller than Mia, remembered thinner eyes, shadowed with regret that ran bone deep. I didn't know Laura whispered the same words she had said months earlier. But I should have. I'm so sorry, baby. Mia stood still for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes. She didn't forgive her mother that day. The wound was still too fresh, the trust too fragile. But she also didn't close the door completely. I need time, Mia said quietly. But I'm not shutting you out forever. Laura nodded, lips pressed tight, and left with silent tears running down her cheeks. Some bridges would take years to rebuild. Others had already begun. Jax Harlan watched all of it from a careful distance. He had kept his promise, never appearing in any official record connected to the case. His name stayed out of the headlines. His empire remained untouched by the storm that had swallowed Victor Kane. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer sat alone in his corner booth at the Velvet Fox every night with the same heavy silence pressing on his chest. The ghost of Sophie Harlan was still there. It would always be there. But its grip had loosened just a little. One soft evening in early May, when the last traces of winter had finally surrendered, Mia walked through the front door of the Velvet Fox. Not the back door this time. She wore a light coat that fit her perfectly and carried a small bouquet of white flowers she had bought herself with money earned from her part-time job at a bookstore near campus. The club was quiet, only a few tables occupied. The jazz trio played low and gentle in the background. Jax sat in his usual corner booth, back to the wall. He saw her the moment she entered. Mia walked straight to him and stopped in front of the table. She didn't sit right away. She simply looked at him, really looked with clear, steady eyes that no longer held terror. "I enrolled at City College," she said softly. "I start in the fall, majoring in psychology and social work." Jax nodded slowly. A faint ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Good," he murmured. "That suits you." Mia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it gently on the table in front of him. "I wrote this for you. You don't have to read it now, or ever. But I wanted you to have it." She turned to leave but paused. "Thank you for asking that night. No one had ever asked me before." Then she walked out into the mild spring night, leaving behind the faint scent of fresh flowers and new beginnings. Jax sat alone for a long time. The bourbon in front of him remained untouched. Finally, he picked up the note and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, slightly uneven, full of quiet courage. "You asked me if I knew him. Nobody had ever asked me anything before. They told me I was wrong. They told me I was sick. But you asked. You knelt down and you asked. That was the first time in 2 years anyone treated me like a person. I don't know everything about you. I only know what you did for me. You gave me a door when every door was closed. Thank you for asking." Jax read it twice. Then he folded the paper with slow, deliberate hands and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, right over his heart, in the same place he had once kept an old photograph of a laughing 16-year-old girl with dark eyes. He looked out the window. The streetlights glowed softly against the clean sidewalks. Somewhere out there, Mia Harper was walking home, no longer running. Jax Harlan, the most feared man in Chicago, sat in his corner booth and felt something he hadn't felt in 27 years. Not redemption. He knew himself too well for that. Not absolution. Just a shift. The heavy stone that had pressed on his chest since the night Sophie never came home had moved ever so slightly. Beneath it, something small and green and fragile had begun to grow. It wasn't much, but in the darkness he had lived in for so long, even the smallest light felt like dawn. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you truly. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.